Chicago. Early summer. The city smelled like money and false charm. Exhaust and perfume braided together in the air. The hotel ballroom shimmered with chandeliers so heavy they looked like they could crush a man's spine if they fell. I remember standing by the bar, one hand on a sweating glass of club soda, watching my son, Josh, and his bride, Emily, dance under all that light. They looked small beneath the gold. Small and already claimed by a world that had no use for men like me. It was supposed to be the happiest day of my son's life. And in a way it was, just not for me. When Robert Hayes, Emily's father, took the microphone, the crowd turned obediently toward him. His smile was politician smooth, his posture rehearsed. He didn't walk so much as glide, as though the floor was built for him. I spent my life on concrete and gravel. Men like him could walk through fire without ever getting ash on their shoes. "Let's raise a glass," he began, voice dripping honey. "To family, to future, to good breeding." Pause perfectly timed. "And to hard work, the kind our good friend here knows all too well." His eyes found mine. I knew the look, the performance of respect that hides a blade. "Mr. Miller," he continued, "you've built quite a life for yourself, from the garage to, well, here." Laughter scattered across the room. Polite, restrained, nervous. "You're proof that ambition can be modest," he added, tilting his glass toward me. "A disgrace to your family, perhaps, but an honest one." Someone gasped. Someone else chuckled to cover it. Josh looked down. Emily looked away. And I stood there, perfectly still, as a roomful of strangers measured my worth by the dirt beneath my fingernails. No one stopped him. Not my son. Not his new wife. Not even my own wife, who squeezed my arm once, silently begging me not to make a scene. That touch, that plea for silence, hurt more than his words. I had been silent for 2 years already. Robert Hayes had started his campaign of contempt the day our children announced their engagement. He'd sized me up over cocktails at his country club, asking casual questions about the auto business, as though being a mechanic were a temporary condition like a rash. When I told him I owned my own shop, he'd smiled the way people smile at a clever dog. "Entrepreneurial spirit," he'd said, as if it were a novelty. At dinner parties, he introduced me to his friends as the car whisperer. At first, I laughed along, because what else could I do? It's strange, the things a man will tolerate for his child's happiness. Every jab, every smirk, every sideways compliment. I told myself it was worth it, because Josh loved Emily, because peace had a price and I'd paid higher ones before. But peace can rot when it's one-sided. It starts to stink of surrender. Robert was the kind of man who measured humanity by business cards and last names. He bragged about his city council connections, his contributions to civic development, his reputation for getting things done. He liked to say things like, "We're builders, Mr. Miller, men of structure," as if my work with engines and grease didn't count as building, as if I wasn't the kind of man who held the world together in silence while people like him took credit for keeping it clean. He called what I did garage dreams. He said it once at a family dinner, swirling a glass of wine older than my mortgage. "You fix cars, right? Good, honest work. The kind of thing people like me are grateful for when we need it." That smirk again. The one that made me want to put my fist through his perfectly arranged teeth. Josh had laughed awkwardly, trying to redirect the conversation. Emily smiled too. That soft, embarrassed smile that said, "Please don't ruin this, Dad." And I didn't. I swallowed it. I smiled back, because when you're the outsider in a room full of pedigrees, your silence becomes their comfort. And they mistake your restraint for inferiority. It went on that way for 2 years. Every holiday, every rehearsal dinner, every chance he got, Robert chipped away at me with that same genteel cruelty. He'd call me brother in public and charity case in private. He'd pat my shoulder after every slight, as if absolving me for existing below his line. He'd brag about his daughter's degrees, his investments, his friends in high places. I'd nod. I'd smile. I'd let him think he'd won every exchange. But what he didn't know, what none of them saw, was that I was collecting it all. Word by word. Moment by moment. Like a ledger. And one day, the balance would be due. At first, Josh didn't see it. He wanted peace too much. He thought I was overreacting. "Dad, he's just joking," he'd say. "You know how he is." But jokes that draw blood aren't jokes. They're practice. They're a rehearsal for humiliation. Still, I told myself to endure, to let my son build his own life without dragging my pride into it. But pride isn't a luxury for men like me. It's the only thing that keeps your spine straight when the world tells you to bow. By the time the wedding came, I had learned how to vanish in plain sight. I had learned to stand in a room full of laughter and not feel part of it. I had learned how to nod while being gutted alive by politeness. So when Robert took that microphone and called me a disgrace, I didn't flinch. I let him speak. I let the room laugh. I let my son look away, because I wanted them all to remember the silence that followed, the stillness that always comes before a reckoning. The truth is, I had stopped hearing his voice months earlier. Every word out of his mouth was just noise. Static from a man who thought wealth was wisdom. What I heard instead was the sound of my own patience breaking. Quietly, methodically, like a bolt shearing under pressure. A clean break, invisible until it fails completely. That night, after the speeches, I went outside to smoke, even though I'd quit years ago. The air was cooler, heavier. I could still hear the laughter from inside, muffled by glass. Robert's voice rose above it all, booming, charming, feeding on applause. I watched him through the window, one hand around a drink, the other gripping my son's shoulder like he owned him, like lineage could be transferred by touch. That was when I realized the truth. Robert didn't just despise me. He envied me. He'd built his empire on influence and handshakes. I'd built mine on torque and grit. He could buy respect, but I had earned it, even if the room refused to see it. And somewhere deep down, that terrified him. Because men like Robert know the one thing they can never buy is authenticity. I finished the cigarette, ground it out beneath my shoe, and walked back inside. I didn't say another word for the rest of the night. I shook hands, smiled for photographs, pretended the wine didn't taste like ashes. But something in me had shifted. My silence wasn't surrender anymore. It was calculation. Because when a man like Robert Hayes believes he's humiliated you beyond recovery, he stops watching his back. And that's when you wait, patiently, quietly, until the moment arrives to remind him that dignity doesn't die. It collects interest. The night before the wedding, we gathered for the rehearsal dinner in a private room overlooking the Chicago River. One of those places where the windows are bigger than the people who pay to sit beneath them. Waiters moved like choreography, every gesture polished, every smile bought. The room smelled of steak, perfume, and performance. I sat near the end of the long mahogany table, next to my wife, while Robert Hayes held court at the head like a man rehearsing for sainthood. He raised his wine glass and began his ritual boasting. The kind of talk that fills silence the way oil fills water, heavy, unmixable. He spoke about his connections on the council, his investments in real estate, and how he had helped organize this wedding. Each time he said the word helped, his eyes drifted toward me, making sure the room remembered who the benefactor was and who the mechanic was. People laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was safer to laugh. Robert liked to construct his version of truth the way he built his reputation, one exaggerated brick at a time. According to him, he had supported the event, advised on the vendors, guided the process. What he didn't mention was that I had signed every check. The venue deposit, the catering, the music, the flowers, my savings account carried all of it. I had told no one because I didn't want the wedding to feel like a contest of wallets. But sitting there, listening to him weave his fiction, I felt something dark stir beneath my ribs. It wasn't anger yet. It was insult, slow, cold, deliberate. He raised his glass again and said, "It takes a village to make something this beautiful, doesn't it? And, well, some of us have a little more experience in getting things done." Laughter again. Pause for effect. He turned toward me. "We should all be grateful for people like Mr. Miller. Honest hands, honest work. After all, someone has to keep the wheels turning." I smiled. I always smiled. But that night, it felt different. like wearing a mask carved from my own skin. Josh sat stiff beside Emily, whispering something under his breath that made her glance nervously toward me. He wanted to keep the peace, as always. He thought silence was control. But silence, I'd learned, is only control when it's mutual. When only one man stays quiet, it's servitude. After dinner, as the guests began to leave, Robert cornered me near the window. "You've done well," he said, clapping my shoulder. "Not everyone from your background manages to marry into something like this." He smiled, satisfied with his own cruelty. "I'd say you've really punched above your weight, haven't you?" It was meant as a compliment. That's how men like him twist the knife, with courtesy. I stared out at the water. The lights rippled, the reflection broken by movement. "You're right," I said. "I have." He grinned, mistaking my restraint for respect. "Good man," he said, and walked away. I stayed there long after he left, watching the river. The surface looked calm, but underneath it moved fast, cold, relentless. I recognized it. That's what I had become. Quiet water, carrying everything downstream. When the wedding day arrived, I woke early. I couldn't sleep, anyway. I ironed my shirt twice, not because it needed it, but because it gave my hands something to do. The morning air was thick, heavy with rain that never came. I remember standing at the hotel window, watching the city below. Taxis gliding through puddles, men in suits holding umbrellas like shields. I thought about all the years I'd worked with my hands, the grease, the cuts, the long hours bent over engines while other men sipped cocktails and called themselves successful. I wondered if that labor had ever truly earned me respect, or if it had only bought me invisibility. At the church, everything gleamed. The flowers looked expensive enough to apologize for something. Emily's family arrived in clusters, polished, confident, carrying their status like armor. My family came quieter, humbler, faces flushed from the travel and the cost of new clothes. Two different worlds pretending they could coexist for a single day. Robert greeted everyone as though he owned the place. He shook hands, kissed cheeks, took credit for details he hadn't paid for. He bragged about the venue discount, the deal he claimed to have negotiated. But what he didn't say, what no one knew but me, was that he hadn't negotiated anything. He'd made a side arrangement with the venue manager. A kickback, a quiet exchange that turned my savings into his profit. And I had proof. 2 months earlier, the manager had called me by mistake, thinking I was part of Robert's committee. In that brief, flustered conversation, he mentioned the bonus agreement. His words, not mine. Later that day, Robert texted me, telling me to send the next payment directly to him so he could bundle expenses. I did it, but I kept the receipts. Something inside me whispered to hold on, that one day his arrogance would expose him. That whisper became prophecy. The wedding unfolded like a scene rehearsed too many times. Vows, smiles, photographs. Everything choreographed for the audience. But I couldn't hear any of it. I was too aware of Robert's voice in the background, too aware of the weight of my phone in my pocket. The recording, the evidence. His voice, clear as daylight, telling the venue manager, "We'll squeeze that old man until he pays without a word." That sentence had lived inside me for weeks, festering. "We'll squeeze that old man." I wasn't old. Not yet. But in his mouth, the word meant something else. Disposable. So when Robert stood again, glass in hand, preparing for another toast, the grand finale of his performance, I realized that silence had finally run its course. My quiet had become permission. My patience had turned to complicity. And if I said nothing now, I would deserve every humiliation he had ever served me. He began, "To our families, to legacy, to love, to unity." I didn't hear the rest. I was already moving toward the sound booth, calm as a man fixing a broken wire. The technician looked up as I handed him my phone. "Play this," I said. "Project it. Loud." He hesitated. "Sir, now." The hall filled with Robert's voice, distorted slightly through the speakers but unmistakable. "We'll squeeze that old man until he pays without a word." Every conversation died mid-sentence. Forks froze halfway to mouths. The music stopped. I watched faces shift, curiosity, confusion, then horror. I saw Emily's eyes widen. I saw Josh's hand drop from his glass. And I saw Robert, pale, rigid, caught between disbelief and panic. The venue manager stepped forward. "That recording's from my office," he said. "Dated last month." His voice cut through the silence like a blade. Robert tried to speak, but his mouth failed him. He reached for charm, for explanation, for control, but every word collapsed under its own weight. The guests began to murmur, chairs scraping the floor as people pulled away from his orbit. And in that moment, I felt no triumph, only release, because truth doesn't roar. It hums, steady and cold, like an engine finally finding its rhythm after years of neglect. Robert turned to me then, his face trembling. How? I met his eyes. "You told me I was a disgrace," I said softly. "You were right, but not in the way you thought." He opened his mouth again, but the event coordinator had already stepped between us, her voice firm. "Mr. Hayes, I'm afraid we're terminating all future contracts. You'll have to leave." He looked around, searching for allies, for sympathy, for anything. But there was none. Even his wife turned her face away. Emily stepped back. Josh didn't move. That silence, that perfect, damning silence, was the sound of his empire cracking. And in that stillness, I realized something. Dignity doesn't announce itself. It waits. It endures. And when the moment comes, it speaks in the voices of those who once laughed at you. Now quiet, now watching, now afraid. The sound of his voice lingered long after the recording stopped. The words, "We'll squeeze that old man," hung over the hall like smoke, settling into every corner, every polite smile that had just died on the guests' faces. Silence filled the room, heavy and asterisk mate, the kind that makes people afraid to move because movement might count as guilt. Robert Hayes stood frozen in the center of it, his champagne glass trembling slightly in his hand. He looked smaller now, not in stature, but in the way a man shrinks when his performance collapses. The self-importance that had once clung to him like expensive cologne had evaporated, leaving behind the sour scent of fear. For a few long seconds, no one breathed. Then, somewhere near the back, a woman's voice cut through the stillness. "Is that real?" she asked. No one answered. The only sound was the faint hum of the speakers still connected to my phone. I didn't move. I stood where I was, my heart steady, not triumphant, not panicked, just steady, like an idling engine. I'd imagined this moment a dozen times in the weeks leading up to the wedding, but now that it had come, it didn't feel like revenge. Felt like balance, like the universe, tired of pretending, had finally exhaled. The venue manager, a short, nervous man who had avoided my eye all day, cleared his throat. "That recording is authentic," he said. "Taken from our office. Mr. Hayes, you negotiated those payments directly." His tone was firm, controlled, the way men sound when they're covering their own liability. Robert opened his mouth, then closed it again. His face twitched, a man cycling through lies too quickly to settle on one. "This is absurd," he said finally, but his voice cracked halfway through. "This is out of context." He gestured toward me. "You can't, I didn't respond. I didn't need to." The proof spoke louder than any defense he could manufacture. Behind him, the guests shifted, chairs scraping, heels clicking against the floor. It was subtle at first, the way people began to distance themselves. A step back here, a turned shoulder there, as though scandal were contagious. Emily's mother pressed her hand to her lips. Emily herself stood motionless beside Josh, eyes wide, her bouquet trembling in her grip. My son looked torn between shock and recognition, as if he'd always suspected this moment might come, but had never believed it would happen in public view. "Dad," he whispered, his voice low, cautious. "Is that true?" Robert's jaw clenched. "Of course not." He turned toward the crowd, forcing a grin that looked more like a grimace. "This is a misunderstanding, a joke, taken completely out of." The venue manager cut him off. The staff and I will not be associated with any event linked to corruption or fraud. All future Hayes events are cancelled, effective immediately. His voice shook, but his resolve didn't. The room shifted again, whispers blooming like brushfire. Fraud, kickbacks, squeeze that old man. The words multiplied, passed from mouth to mouth, each repetition carving another layer off Robert's reputation. Emily's mother tried to reach for him. Robert, just stop. Her voice was brittle. He pulled his arm away. He turned on me then, desperate now. You think you've won something? He hissed, too low for most to hear but loud enough for me. You've humiliated my family. You've ruined this day. I met his eyes, calm as ever. No, Robert. You did that the moment you thought I was too small to fight back. For a heartbeat, he looked ready to swing. Then he saw the eyes on him, hundreds of them, and deflated. The anger leaked out, replaced by something uglier, shame. It made his voice small. You'll regret this, he muttered half to himself. The event coordinator, her headset glinting under the lights, approached cautiously. Mr. Hayes, she said, I'm going to have to ask you to step away from the stage. He hesitated, then did something I'll never forget. He tried to speak again, microphone still in hand, but the words never came. Instead, his throat tightened, his breath stuttered, and he began to tremble. Not from rage, but from realization. He had built his identity on control, and I had taken that from him with nothing more than a recording and a steady voice. Security appeared at the edges of the room, discreet but unmistakable. They didn't touch him. They didn't need to. Robert stumbled backward on his own, mumbling something about defamation, about misunderstandings, about lawyers. No one stopped him. No one offered him a hand. When he reached the doors, the applause began. Quiet at first, hesitant, then louder. It wasn't for me. It wasn't even for justice. It was the applause of people relieved to no longer be complicit in his arrogance. Applause for distance. I turned to look at Josh. My son's face was pale, his expression unreadable. He didn't smile, didn't frown. He just stared at me, like a man seeing a stranger wearing his father's face. Emily whispered something to him, her voice shaky. He didn't answer. The rest of the evening unfolded like a film running after the credits. Motion without meaning. The band resumed playing, but half-heartedly. The guests drank, whispered, avoided eye contact. The bride's laughter sounded forced, brittle. And through it all, I stood quietly, shaking hands, nodding when spoken to, as though none of it mattered anymore. Later, in the hallway outside the ballroom, Robert's wife approached me. Her mascara had run, and her voice carried that brittle composure women perfect after years beside men like him. You've destroyed him, she said. I met her gaze. No, I said. I showed everyone who he already was. She flinched, turned, and walked away. By the time I returned to the main hall, the wedding had transformed. The lights seemed dimmer, the laughter thinner. Emily and Josh danced again, but their smiles no longer belonged to the moment. They were holding on, performing stability for the cameras. I didn't interrupt. I stayed by the wall, hands folded, a spectator to my own vindication. And yet, beneath the calm, something inside me ached, because this wasn't what I'd wanted. I hadn't come to destroy a man, only to reclaim myself. But revenge, even justified, carries its own corrosion. It eats the same way humiliation does, just from the opposite side. I found Josh later, outside near the parking lot. He stood alone, his tie loosened, his expression lost. When he saw me, he didn't speak right away. The night air was cool, filled with the hum of distant traffic. Dad, he said finally, voice low, you could have told me. I tried, I said. You weren't ready to hear it. He nodded slowly. I didn't want this to happen today. Neither did I. I looked toward the city lights reflecting off the river. But some truths only matter when everyone's watching. He studied me for a long moment, searching for something. Then he said, you were right. His voice cracked. I just wish it didn't have to be like this. So do I said. But men like Robert don't stop until they're stopped. We stood there, the two of us, father and son. Not reconciled, not distant, just quiet. A fragile truce made of exhaustion. When I went back inside, Robert was gone. His absence was a presence of its own, the kind of silence that leaves a hollow where noise used to live. The band played softer now, guests danced cautiously, and every toast that followed avoided words like success, status, or legacy. They'd become dirty words, suddenly too expensive to use. And I thought, this is what truth does. It doesn't shout. It removes sound. It leaves only what cannot be denied. Robert Hayes was escorted out of the ballroom before the cake was even cut. The security guards didn't grip his arms. They didn't have to. The shame did the work for them. His face had the gray pallor of a man who'd suddenly realized the difference between reputation and worth. Outside, flashes from a few phones followed him like tiny explosions, proof that humiliation, once lit, never really goes dark again. Inside, the wedding limped forward. The band tried to find its rhythm, but no one wanted to dance. The laughter that returned came brittle, hollow, like something rehearsed for the sake of cameras already half-packed away. I sat at my table with a plate I didn't touch, the smell of sugar and champagne thick around me. Across the room, Josh and Emily whispered, faces close, both of them pale under the golden light that now looked too warm, too heavy. When the coordinator announced the next toast, no one moved. The microphone waited on the stage, lonely, a relic of a celebration that had turned into evidence. The silence stretched until Josh stood, hesitating. His voice trembled as he said, "Let's remember what today was meant to be. About love, about family." He glanced at me, uncertain. I nodded once, saving him from having to invent forgiveness he didn't yet feel. Applause followed, gentle, merciful. For a moment, I thought the night might close quietly, but endings rarely obey the people who need them to. Later, as guests began to leave, Emily's mother approached me. Her perfume was wilted now, her posture smaller. "You've made your point," she said. "But you could have waited. You humiliated him." I looked at her hands. They trembled as she smoothed the sequins on her dress. "He humiliated himself," I said. "I only pressed play." She shook her head. "You men and your pride." "Pride?" I asked. "That's what you call respect when someone else asks for it." She turned away without answering. Outside, the air had cooled. The river hissed against the stone embankment below the hotel, carrying bits of trash and reflection downstream. I stood alone beneath the awning, letting the city noise replace the memory of that recording. For the first time in years, I didn't feel smaller than the world around me. I just felt equal to it, worn, scarred, but upright. Josh found me there. His tuxedo jacket hung loose, his tie gone. "He's gone," he said. "I know." "He said he's going to sue you." "He can try," I said. "Truth is free." Josh smiled faintly, the first real smile I'd seen from him all day. "You always taught me that doing the right thing costs more than people think. And still worth the price," I said. He nodded, eyes glinting in the streetlight. "I'm proud of you, Dad." The words landed softly, almost shy, but they cut deeper than all of Robert's insults combined. For 2 years I had waited to hear that tone. No pity, no obligation, just truth. I placed a hand on his shoulder. "Don't be proud," I said. "Just remember, when someone tries to buy your silence, it means they're afraid of your voice." He hugged me then, brief but real, the kind of embrace men share when words would only spoil it. When he went back inside, I stayed. The last limousine pulled away, carrying the Hayes family toward whatever explanations awaited them. I imagined Robert in the back seat, staring at his reflection in the tinted glass, realizing it was the only audience he had left. The weeks that followed blurred together. News of the incident spread through their circle faster than any rumor I'd ever heard. One article in a local paper hinted at financial impropriety surrounding a prominent city figure. Another called it a misunderstanding at a private event. But people always know the difference between smoke and fire. Robert's contracts dissolved one by one. His partners withdrew. His phone stopped ringing except for reporters. He tried to call me once. I let it go to voicemail. The message was brief. You think you're righteous, but you're vindictive. You've destroyed more than my reputation. I deleted it halfway through. Because what he never understood, and maybe never could, is that truth doesn't destroy. It reveals. Emily reached out next. She came to the shop on a Tuesday afternoon, wearing jeans and a sweatshirt, no makeup, her face washed clean of ceremony. He's broken, she said quietly. He stays in bed. He keeps asking what he did to deserve it. He knows exactly what he did, I said. She looked down. Josh and I postponed the honeymoon. We couldn't leave with everything falling apart. You don't owe me an explanation, I said. You owe yourselves peace. Tears filled her eyes, small and human. I never thanked you, she whispered, for paying for the wedding, for everything. I wanted to tell her it was nothing, but it wasn't. It was years of restraint, of swallowing humiliation for the sake of harmony that never came. Take care of my son, I said instead. She nodded, hugged me once, and left. The smell of machine oil and her perfume mingled in the air after she was gone. Strange but not unpleasant. Like two worlds that had finally touched without needing to fit. That night, I sat in my kitchen alone. The lights were dim, the coffee gone cold. On the table lay the small black phone that had changed everything. I replayed the recording once more, not out of spite, but to remind myself how easily civility disguises cruelty. His voice filled the room again. Smooth, confident, poisoned. When it ended, I deleted it for good. Because the truth had already done its work. It didn't need a witness anymore. I thought about the years leading to this moment. The dinners, the smirks, the quiet dismissals. Every act of patience had built a wall around me, and tonight that wall had finally cracked open. Freedom is a strange thing. It doesn't feel like victory. Feels like silence. Like the world has stopped demanding your apology for existing. I poured a small glass of bourbon and watched the ice melt. The reflection in the amber liquid looked older than I remembered, but steadier. I thought of Robert, somewhere in that city, learning what it means to be powerless in the eyes of those who once praised him. Maybe he'd change. Maybe he wouldn't. That wasn't my concern anymore. Tomorrow I would open the shop, change the oil in a dozen cars, listen to engines hum back to life. Ordinary work. Honest work. The kind of labor men like Robert will never understand because it can't be leveraged, only lived. Before bed, I wrote a note on a scrap of paper and folded it into my wallet. Respect isn't inherited. It's earned, spent, and sometimes stolen back. I keep it there still. Because the world runs on two currencies, money and dignity. Lose one, you can recover. Lose both, and you become someone like Robert Hayes. A man applauded for everything except truth. So I ask you, who was I in all of this? The villain who exposed another man's sin? Or the fool who waited too long to defend himself? Would you have stayed silent? Would you have endured it, knowing silence was the language of consent? I gave my answer the only way I knew how, with evidence, not anger. And when the applause died, when the lights dimmed, when every false friend turned their eyes away, the only sound left was truth itself. Steady, patient, and unashamed.